As we say goodbye to Oscar and most of the United States is dry and warm this week, we take a trip north to Alaska to see what may be in store as colder weather starts to build. Next on the Weather Farm. Good Tuesday evening on this October 22nd, 2024. These are your weather headlines from the Weather Farm. We have dry conditions and above normal temperatures for most of the lower 48. We venture up into the Arctic. What's going on in Alaska with its snow and its temperatures? Does that give us an indication of where our winter might be heading? And then we look for the next 3 days about the weather and the temps across the lower 48 as we head to the last full weekend of October. So let's jump right in and look at the national weather hazards. At this hour, we have some freeze watches across parts of the west. Not very much to worry about. We also have a red flag warning across the state of Connecticut. Winds on our Wednesday will gust 15 to 25 miles per hour, which isn't terribly bad, but given the low relative humidity and the lack of precipitation there over the last 3 weeks, in fact, most of New England has not seen significant rain during the months of September and October. The state of Connecticut is under a red flag warning for your Wednesday, but caution should be exercised in all of New England as you burn anything outdoors. So let's take a look, jump north to Alaska. Let's take a look at temperatures. And here generally we see in the middle, this is where Fairbanks is. We see temperatures generally in the 20s, going sub-zero at night, which is a little bit below average for this time of year. But if we look at the clock here up above, and we see that as we move into November, temperatures do slightly warm to more seasonal temperatures, highs around 20 to 25, lows 5 to 10 above at night. And then we can look at the overall weather patterns. We see a lot of snow showers in the interior and north slope as several intense low pressure systems come across the Aleutian Islands into the Gulf of Alaska, bringing heavy snows and rain across the southern coast of Alaska. And if we see that snowpack as it continues to build over the next 2 weeks, we see that from now until that first week part of November, we see a general 6 to 12 inches across most of Alaska, including the North Slope. But down along the South Slope, we can see 20 to 30 inches of snow. And if we look down, this is the North Pole right here. If we look down across Siberia and into Alaska and the northern parts of Canada, we see that that snowpack is building there. And we take this out into the first few days of November. We see that that snowpack is starting to build. That is all a good sign because as the polar vortex continues to rotate around the North Pole and the snowpack continues to build, temperatures will lower. That will continue to start sending shots of colder air down into the lower 48. Things that we need to have happen to have the winter and seasonal temperatures that we're expecting. But the main thing that we're going to look into November is when does this snowpack start to build in parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. If we can get that snowpack building by the second or third week of November, then it's just a matter of time before we start seeing the snowpack build down to the northern plains. So this is something we're going to continue to watch here at the Weather Farm. How does Alaska, how does Siberia look? How do the northern territories of Canada? What is the snowpack? What's going on there? So let's take a look again at our upper level chart. As I mentioned last night, we're going to have this little trough that's going to slide in across the Great Lakes area on our Wednesday night into Thursday. It's going to switch the wind direction around and cool our temperatures down on our Thursday, but then we'll warm right back up on Friday and into the upcoming weekend as another ridge builds. As we've been talking most of this week, we are going to have a zonal flow for the most part for the next 4 to 5 days. But we see that starting on Saturday, we see a huge ridge building across the west into the prairies of Canada. That's going to send all the storm track way north, up and over the ridge, and then down into the eastern half of the United States. This ridge continues to move east as we move towards Halloween, and behind it we see another deepening trough happening. What's going to happen is something similar that we saw last weekend. We're going to get an area of low pressure somewhere around this Four Corners region that's going to dive deep and then in its classic pattern, it's going to jump and move up across the central plains around Halloween. Just how far west or east that trough moves will determine what our weather will be like here in the eastern half of the United States. I will tell you at this time, the trend is for us to continue to be in that above normal weather pattern for most of the eastern half of the United States. Well, let's take a look further south as we continue making our way down towards the equator. And we have the latest on Tropical Storm Oscar. In fact, it is no longer a tropical storm. It has been downgraded, and the National Hurricane Center has stopped issuing advisories on Oscar. It has basically dissipated. It really ran into a lot of wind shear, something we talked about last night, and it had a lot of dry air, especially on that western part of the storm. We can see that a lot of the convection was here far east of the center of circulation, and it's just basically fallen apart at this time. So we don't expect the National Hurricane Center to issue any more advisories on Oscar after today. And when we look across the Atlantic, we really don't see any areas of concern or watch for the next 7 days. There is something that is hinting, if you look out 10 to 14 days, there's something that is hinting that might pop up here just north of South America. Again, it's way far out there. It's too early to make any kind of predictions of what will happen, but it is going to be an area as we move into that first week of November that we're going to keep an eye on. Climatologically, though, this is not a favorable area for storm development. Most of the storm development in November does tend to happen north of the Dominican, north of Haiti, north of Cuba, this area off the southeastern coast of Florida. So for something to develop here would be unusual, but not unheard of. So stay with us here at the Weather Farm. So let's take a look at our weather again over the next 3 days here in the lower 48. As I mentioned, we're going to have high pressure in place for our Wednesday across most of the United States. We have that little trough that's going to come in from the north and west into the northeast. Ahead of it, it's going to bring some light rain into parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and even parts of far northern Maine. Behind it, cooler temperatures. Again, there's that 540 line. That is that line we look for to determine whether or not we're going to have rain or snow. Temperatures, again, across most of the United States, it's going to be warm from Oklahoma down to Texas, 80s and 90s. Even if we look down into Mexico, parts of Mexico will be in the triple digits. And we see that cool weather across parts of Quebec with temperatures in the 30s and 40s. A little bit cooler across the northern Great Lakes with temperatures only in the 40s and 50s. So taking a look at our Thursday, we see that, again, we have a area of low pressure across Colorado. It's not associated with any kind of precipitation. High pressure builds into the Pacific Northwest, gives them a little bit of break from the rain and heavy snow that they've been encountering. And that little high pressure builds in behind that low that affected the Northeast on our Wednesday. So pretty quiet weather across most of the United States for your Thursday. And if we take a look at our temperatures across the United States on Thursday, it's pretty much the same as our Wednesday. A lot of heat across the Central Plains, even 70s reaching as far north as Minnesota and in the Dakotas. The Northwest is cooling down, temperatures in the 40s and 50s across Washington and Idaho. And across the Northeast, in parts of New York into Maine, again, temperatures in the 40s. Here in the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, we're going to cool down to the 60s. We've been in those mid-70s the last few days. We're going to cool down about 10 degrees. And then looking at our Friday, we have a little bit of a wave that's going to move through the Great Lakes, provide a slight chance of rain for the Great Lakes area. High pressure off the coast of North Carolina is going to keep weather very nice for that part of the country. And then again, the west of the Mississippi, it's all quiet, dominated by a high pressure region here across southern Manitoba. That's going to continue to build and help that ridge build across the upcoming weekend. Temperatures, as mentioned, are going to be a little bit more zonal. So they're going to be pretty much uniform from west to east. So 50s across the northern tier, 70s across the central, and then 80s and 90s across the southern tier of the United States. Pretty typical weather for a zonal pattern here in the United States. Precipitation, snowfall, again, it's going to be mainly confined to Canada and the province of Canada. We will see that little disturbance, some higher elevation snows, especially around Yellowstone over the weekend where we could see snowfall. But it's early next weekend, into next week, that we start to see that deepening trough building across the west that could bring a little more significant snows in those snow elevations lowering in the western part of the United States. And rainfall over the next 7 days. Again, I mentioned there's going to be a small chance of rain across the Great Lakes in our Thursday into our Friday, but the best chance is going to be over parts of southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and parts of eastern Iowa. As that moves east into Indiana and Ohio, the rain is not going to be as pronounced. Rainfall estimates will be less than 1/10 of an inch in most locations. And then as we look toward this first part of next week, as I mentioned, snowfall and its liquid equivalent across the mountains of the Rockies. And we have another surge of precipitation for the Pacific Northwest, which is going to bring heavy snows and rains into parts of British Columbia. And this is all important information because on Thursday we will get an update of our National Drought Monitor Index. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of areas of the United States that have not seen significant rain. If we look at the Northeast, we have several cities that have not seen rain for almost 3 weeks. New York City, you're one of them. Atlanta, Georgia, you've not seen measurable rain for 22 days. In fact, you have not received any measurable precipitation during the entire month of October. And that's the first time that it's gone this long since records were kept back in 1872. Now, the driest month on record was a trace of precipitation back a few years ago, but Atlanta, you've never recorded a month without any measurable precipitation, but you could break that record this coming week. Again, and when we look across the plains, we see areas of severe and extreme drought, especially across parts of northeastern Wyoming into southeastern Montana. We'll see what the latest Drought Monitor Index tells us as we look to new weather here on Thursday. But the outlook is for above normal precipitation for the period from Halloween to the first few days of the new month, above normal precipitation for most of the Central Plains moving into the Great Lakes region. The Northeast, where you have that red flag warning for Connecticut, again, dry conditions are expected across that area. New York, how long will you go before you have measurable precipitation again? And temperatures, again, as we talked about last night, for the eastern 3/4 of the nation are expected to be above average entering the first few days of November. But signs of something may be changing as the western quarter of the United States from Nevada, Utah, and Idaho are expected to be below normal during this time. We hope you've enjoyed your time here at the Weather Farm. We hope to see you again real soon.